Hi, it's Matt. Another edition of You May Also Like. And today we think that you may also like celebrity interviews, and specifically Bryan Tobin. Hi, Bryan.
How's it going?
Good. Now, you do a lot of celebrity interviews with your podcast, Tobin Tonight,
That is true.
right? And you're also from Newfoundland.
Yes, bye.
And there we go. Excellent. But your origins go right back to wanting to become a broadcaster. So, at what age did you know that you wanted to become a broadcaster?
I think when I was I know it's 16 or 17. My original goal was to go to I wanted to be on SNL, and then I was like, okay, maybe you don't know if your comedy is good, you don't know if people find you funny, and it was around that same time that I ended up digging up an old Christmas gift that was a radio player. Like you'd put it on an FM station that's just static, and then you could like plug in CDs. You could hear yourself on the radio, and I just thought to myself, like, hey, that might be an interesting career choice to get into broadcasting because, like, growing up listening to radio down here in Newfoundland or anywhere really now, you can still have a personality, have a few jokes, and present people with like news, sports, entertainment, and you can still have a little bit of a character. So that's kind of where it started.
I'm thinking about your affinity and attachment to SNL.
Yeah.
What time does that even come on in Newfoundland? I can't imagine if it's live in New York at 11:30. That must be like coming on at
Oh man.
1 or
Like,
2 a.m., 1 a.m.?
oh yes, yeah. When around 16, so we used to go to my cabin or cottage a lot, and me and my brother would watch the two hockey games, and then by the second hockey game, he'd be passed out, but he'd be the one who's like, "Hey, I'm gonna stay up for SNL." I'm like, yeah, right, you are." And then, yeah, it was like 1 o'clock, and then I'd be like, "All right, like, how long am I gonna last?" And I'd watch the whole episode. But it was back when like SNL had a lot of key members. It's still good, it's still watchable, but they lost a lot of people over a short period of time, and it's kind of hard to replace.
Well, it comes in waves, right? Like,
Yeah,
I think a lot of us remember SNL in a period that we, liked it the most. I, for one, liked it the best in the 90s with Mike Myers and Dana Carvey and Phil Hartman.
yeah.
And then, of course,
Sandler.
yeah, and then they leave and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, the show's no good anymore. And then it comes back again.
Everyone says that. Like, I even say this to my friend Bradley. I'm just still like, man, remember when we used to watch? They had like Farrell, Faye, Polar, and then you're like, all right, then Kristen Wiig comes in, and then you're like, yeah, I'm not giving her a chance. And she comes to be Kristen Wiig, and you like her too. So it takes time.
What kind of radio show did you expect that you would be doing as a broadcaster? Or maybe it was going to be a TV show?
Oh man, oh that's a good story. So when I first started, like the whole idea of a radio show or even a podcast, I originally pitched it to because I was at Algonquin at the time, and you kind of needed it for an internship. Now, I originally planned to go to Toronto to be part of Global TV. Just didn't pan out. Things happen. So I got stuck in this place where it's like you need the credits, and they either wanted me to go back to doing the radio on their station, which is what we were doing for the last 2 years. And I was like, I'm not really getting much out of this internship if that's the case. So I pitched it to, I think it's, you may know them, but it was like Dan Mellon and Dan Polanen. Uh, I like both of them. I find Polanen was a really kind of a tough teacher. And that's kind of the teachers I like because they're not going to bullshit you. They're just going to tell you it as it is. So I came up with the idea of, hey, what about if I just did like a sports show? And I'm just going to tell people like what the scores of were games at Carleton, Algonquin, University of Ottawa. And he's like, that sounds good. When are you going to post it? I was like, oh, the next day. He's like, yeah, that's no good. I was like, oh, okay. So then I came up with the idea of like, what about if I tried doing a podcast with friends and we talked about issues? He's like, I'm not green lighting that at all. So it was like the second time I left his office, and I was a little bit furious. So I came back to him, and just off the spit in my mouth, I said, what if I just try to go interview celebrities? And he was just like, go for it. But it wasn't like happy go for it. It was kind of like, oh yeah, that's never going to happen. And it just pissed me off. So I was like, let's go for it. And Junos were in Ottawa, and being the East Coast, I felt like, I could get Jimmy Rankin, Heather Rankin on really quickly because give them my story, let them know I'm from the East Coast. And then that kind of spiraled from there because Jimmy was our first guest. Heather came on next. And then I believe it was like the Ennis sisters. And then with the Junos here, I ended up getting Max Kerman from the Arkells. And it just kind of went from there because then you kind of had something to send people to say, hey, these are people I've had on early. And I guess they want to be a part of the process.
So if I'm reading this and listening to this correctly, this podcast is your internship.
Yeah, it was originally my internship. And then after a while, once Algonquin was over, there was two sides of it. Of either I was like, okay, I've done what I had to do. I got my grade. It's done. Let's go out and find a job in media. But I really enjoyed doing it. And I felt like by keeping on doing that, I could give people sample material because I'm no longer in university or college. Where am I getting my sample material if I'm not working? So I ended up talking to the two Dans and they allowed me to use the studio. And that was great for the first year because it was over summer, no one was coming in. But then by the second time, when school was starting to start again and they, needed those studios, it was hard to arrange a time that was free for you to go in to talk to the person you had on. So then I moved it to University of Ottawa because they wanted something to put on their station for a little bit. And I guess the agreement was you use our station and we'll put it on. And I was like, that works. Gives me another kind of platform to use. And then eventually I moved back here to Newfoundland and I didn't have anything, like no mics, no sound equipment. So there's like 3 or 4 months that it was just dead. And then I started up again because I was like, kind of miss doing it.
So the Rankins were your first interviews.
Yeah.
And then it progressed from there. So how would you say that your style of interview has evolved over like all the episodes that you've done with all the celebrities that you've met?
I think at first, like anyone, when you first start it, you're kind of trying to figure out how to find your own character, your own niche, like your own voice. And I think a real turning point for me was when we had Lisa LaFlamme on, and she kind of explained to me like, "Hey, that's life. Like I started off at University of Ottawa," she said, and like you were trying to find your voice, what your passion is, and I was like, "Okay, so it's just not me that's struggling to figure this out." Because I think the interview with Max Kerman is the one that I really enjoy going back and listening to because it really kind of turns a dial of how just monotone I sound and how uninterested I sound, even though I thought at the time, I'm like, I'm totally engaged. Like I'm making a few jokes at my name. He's making a few jokes at me being a Newfoundlander. I'm not taking it seriously, like in terms of like being offended. And my friend goes and listens to it and he's like, it sounds like you're just not interested in the Arkells at all. I was like, let me go listen to it. I'm like, oh my God, it does sound like that. So it's trying to find a fine line after a while of doing so many interviews and being like, how do I come across friendly, but also like enthusiastic? And yeah, at times let them know like, hey, here's my passion. Here's something that's funny, that's interesting. And you go from there. But it does take a while to really get into that. And I guess wouldn't be character, but just getting your own comfortable zone of, okay, this is where I'm comfortable of doing this, and this is where I would never do that. I wouldn't say this in person to somebody, so why am I saying it on this podcast?
I think that's very astute of you to point out, I need to go listen to myself and how I sound in order to get better at what I'm doing. The self-check as people call it. Going back and reviewing your work is really something that a lot of podcasters skip over, and it's why they continue to be boring going forward. They're not really progressing unless they're going back and going through the same experience that the listener is going through when they're listening to a show.
It's tough because I don't think for me and maybe others out there, it's like hearing my own voice. Like when I used to hear my own voice through radio checks in like at Algonquin, or even if someone was showing you how you sound over the phone, I'm like, man, I sound like a 14-year-old girl. I'm like, I don't like that. It's like some people would call the house and just be like, is your mom there? Or is this Maureen Tobin? And I'm like, no, this is Bryan. I'm like, do I actually sound like my mom? Like, okay. But it's something that I think over time you kind of have to just sit down, tough it out, because you'll learn a good bit from it. Like if my friend didn't have to tell me how I sounded in that interview or that conversation, I probably would have kept on going that way, doing a little bit of research and be like, okay, we're going to talk about things in a linear fashion. And over time, sending that out to different people on radio, because you're still trying to find a job at this point in radio, because it's still kind of your main goal, they would come back and give you a little bit of criticism. And I think one of the biggest ones I got, I can't remember his name now, but he said, if you're supposed to be a conversational podcast, he's like, why are you doing this all in linear fashion? He's like, do you talk to your friends in a linear fashion? I was like, not really. I'd probably start with like the most topical thing, they had going for them, and then just kind of range from there, like whatever comes to your mind. And he's like, exactly. So do that with them. Like if they bring up about a movie that they were in 2 years ago, why are you then going back to where you wanted to go with your talking point? Like go off that. And I was like, okay. And at first I was like, man, that's going to like confuse me. Where am I going with it? But it's right. If you're a conversational podcast, it's technically how you can do it. And he said, it doesn't mean you lose your research or you don't have questions ready or have it planned, but just go off of like what they're doing or what they're saying. Like, don't make it sound like everything's preempted.
And I'm sure you get this question a lot because of your proximity to Newfoundland, and that is, was your father the premier of Newfoundland?
Oh, yeah, that one I get a lot. I feel like that should have been the name of a podcast, where it should have been like, I am not related to that Bryan Tobin. But yeah, no, we have no relation to that Bryan Tobin. But I do get that a lot. My grade 5 teacher would not call me Bryan or Tobin. He would just call me Premier, which, when you're 10, you're kind of like, don't really get it. But years later, I'm like, yeah, oh, that's why. Okay, understood.
How long has it been since Bryan Tobin was actually premier of Newfoundland?
Oh my God. I don't know. Was it like 2000? Well, I guess 2001, 2002. Wasn't it Roger Grimes? I'm not really up on my politics, but I know he was there in the 90s, which was like really tough for me because I'm a 91 baby. So it's like, yeah, just when you start school, people start calling you premier. And I thought like, oh, that means like I'm number one, right? And they're like, no, is Bryan Tobin your dad? I'm like, no, it's not my dad. William Tobin's my dad. And they're like, I don't know. I'm not interested in William Tobin. I'm like, all right, cool.
Well, I'm not saying it could be better or worse, but you could be Ben Mulrooney and have people come up and go, "You're not related to that asshole who ran the country for a few years, are you?" Which did happen to him.
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess I'll count my blessings on that one.
What's the process that you use for getting a celebrity to appear on your podcast?
So that's a good question, because if you're open and honest with it, and I think it's something that I'm kind of doing the crossroads right now with is when I was maybe in 22 or 23, when I was how many years old, when I was first starting, I was like, at first I thought it was easy just to reach out to their Facebook page, their Twitter, Instagram, whatever. And then I started looking up, like if you put in on Google, like Arkel's contact information or Heather Rankin contact, sometimes it would just come up on the Google search. And then I found a website, I think it was like booking.ca or something along those lines, where you pay $20 a month and it kind of gives you the agents, the managers, all that contact. Now, sometimes it can still be incorrect, but that's where I just looked into it. I'm like, all right, let's give it a shot. And then I started reaching out to their managers, their PR people, and I was still trying to figure out what message I was going to send them. So at first I kind of relied on the disability a little bit, because I was like, man, everyone likes a good disability story or an underdog story of like someone who had a stroke at 12, wanted to be in media, is trying to get in media, but this is his way of saying, all right, this is what I have to do to get in media. Give me a shot. And for sometimes it works. Sometimes they'll come back and say, listen, love your story. They're not doing anything right now, but love the persistence. And for me, it's hard to take no. It's hard to take rejection, especially when like growing up, you don't get a lot of it. Not that I'm spoiled. It's just that many of the projects that you're doing, you're only going to hear no once. It's done. It's over. You're moved on. But where this is kind of like your career or passion, you have to take no a lot more often than I thought you would. And it's tough to take it, but you kind of have to let it be like, I guess, duck on a water's back, just kind of let it flow. Or like, if you're a Leafs fan, you probably relate to it, where it's like, this is our year to win the cup, and it's not. You just kind of let it go after the next year. But essentially that's how it started. And then over a bit of time, I started progressing the email. Like once you start getting more acts on, then you could use those names to be like, here's who we had on. We had Steve Howie, we've had Tim Allen. And then I thought, okay, that should help. But it's always a learning process. I'm learning now, maybe it doesn't matter who you've had on. Maybe they just care about like how you're going to present them. Like, who cares if you had Adam Sandler on? How are you going to present my act? Like, why does this act have to come on? Like, we want to make sure when this person comes on your show that we're getting either a good soundbite, good audience, good reach. And I think that's where I'm working on now. Takes time. I'm sure that people have got that mastered in like second or third episode or year 2 or year 3. I'm what I call a trouble child, where it's like, all right, I need to learn the hard way because that's the only way it's going to dig through my brain.
You say your show's not your standard Q&A, so how do you make sure that your show is not your standard Q&A?
That's fair. I feel like to make it not a standard Q&A, it's a lot of times when I look at interviews, like either on ET Canada, no offense to them, that's what they're doing, and it's news outlets, like they only have maybe 5 minutes with them, maybe 3 minutes. So you're trying to get the most out of that clip. So if they got a new movie out, they're talking about the new movie. That's it, one shot, done. Now I've done those before. My interview with Tim Allen was kind of like that, where they only gave me so many minutes. I was cool with that because Tim Allen, love Tim Allen. But I had to cater it around like, okay, these are the questions I got to ask. But after the interview was done, I was like, this isn't really authentic to me or genuine. Like, yeah, I was still interested, but I didn't really get the sound clip or sound bite that I wanted. And I think the way that you make a conversation not a standard Q&A is you shoot from the heart. You ask questions that you think, all right, like if they don't like it, that's cool. If they like it, it's fine. Like, you kind of have to ruffle some feathers maybe, but I always start interviews or conversations off with people by letting them know if there's a question they don't like we can skip it. I might still ask it, but like you don't have to answer it, because I know people are going to be out there and be like, man, don't you want a good soundbite of a clip that like you really dug into someone? I'm like, no, it's great if you do, but I kind of want to have either a friendship or a conversation with this person so I can have them on again. I don't want it to come across like I'm digging at them, but it doesn't mean I shy away from the question. We had Jodie Sweetin on in a recent episode, and like I asked her at the beginning, like, is it okay if we talk about your mental health, like the drug addictions that you overcame? And she talks about it anyway. So she was totally fine with it. Now, I didn't dive too hard into her, but I did mention about, and this might age me a little bit, but I did honestly say to her there was a point in time that I felt in Jodie Sweety's case that she was going to go down the same road as the girl from Different Strokes, where I think Howard had her on and asked her to do a drug test. And I thought, I was like, when I was younger, I was like, man, that's going to be like Jodie. Jodie's going to walk down that road. And I told her that, but that's how I think you make things more conversation. Like, you speak you speak from the heart, you explain to someone like what exactly you're thinking, and you go from there. Like, worst case scenario is if they get offended or if they're mad, you just apologize. Like, it's not to be rude or mean.
Is your show live or is it recorded?
I pre-record my shows just in case, something happens in the show. Like, again, because you're asking conversational questions, sometimes they're personal and they might not like that. Sometimes I've had certain ones that will say, can you edit that out? Or, I'm okay with that answer, but I did stumble a little bit. Can you fix that up for me? And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. But I think I do 1 or 2 lives if someone, like if a PR person comes back and says, hey, can you do this live? Because they're after tweeting about it or telling their audience, and they'll apologize and say, we didn't know, like, but they've already done it. I'm like, yeah, sure. And then I'll just let them know again beforehand. These are the instructions, and most times it's cool. I think the last one we did live was with Sunshine and Broccoli. They're like a children's entertainment group here in Canada, and that went fairly well.
How many members of Full House have you had on?
So if you include the actual like episodes themselves, I had Bob Saget, John Stamos, Jodie Sweetin, and then Dave Coulier joined John Stamos' episode at the end. And this is where it becomes conversational, where you probably don't get this in an interview. It was my birthday, so I felt like, I was going to reach anyway. Stamos sang me a happy birthday at the beginning, which I thought was kind of cool. But I said to Stamos, I was like, all right, John, before we ended this off, I'm like, I've had Bob on, I've got you on. I'm like, man, I can't get a Coulier. I'm like, I'm trying to get Coulier. And then he kind of laughed. He's like, hold on, I have 3 of us. Coulier is the one you can't get. And I'm like, yeah, I know. You think Coulier would be like the easiest one to get. And I'm like, I'm a Detroit fan. You think that would appeal to him because I think he's born in Michigan and he goes for Detroit as well. And he does a whole bunch of stuff that involves hockey. So he came on and they had a chat about how Stamos didn't know hockey. But yeah, I haven't had Dave fully on in his own episode, but I think it's about maybe four members.
Yeah. So when a celebrity death hits you and you've interviewed the person, like the Bob Saget
Yeah.
interview that you did, how does that hit you? Because I think when you do an interview and you go through, that 1 hour experience, and you've got the podcast episode that lives in your stream, and an untimely death with Bob Saget, how did you react to it? And how did your listeners react to it?
I think there's two sides of it, and again, I'll be honest. Like, there's a part of you that's very grateful, very happy that you got him on. Especially, like, I do have a story about that that's interesting. But uh, the first part of you is like, okay, I can't believe like we got him on. I'm one of just say, I don't know. There's probably a lot of people that interviewed him, but now you're on that list of someone who's had a conversation with Bob. Uh, and then another side of you is kind of like sad, disappointed that you will never have a follow up with him, or for his fan base or audience, that he's gone. Because I thought he was very humble. He was very easygoing to have a conversation with, and it just does strike you a little bit differently. I think we mentioned this in Jody's episode, where I have two older brothers. When they mention about a celebrity's death, that they grew up in the '80s. I mean, it might sound a little bit rude, but sometimes I'm like, who is that? What did they play? What role are they on that show? I never heard of them. And Bob, for me, was that guy that as soon as I heard about his death, I was kind of like a little bit instantly crushed, because I watched him on Full House. I watched him on AFV. He does the voiceover narration for How I Met Your Mother. So in a way, he's kind of been always in my life in different stages. Um, and yeah, it did kind of hit a little bit hard. Now, if we have time, the story I was going to say about Bob is we tried to have Bob on for like 3 or 4 years. I was kind of very like adamant of sending emails, and the guy was still friendly. Like, his agent was coming back and be like, hey, he's not doing anything right now. Reach back at this point. And I was like, okay, reach back at this point. Hey, he's still busy. And then it was around, yeah, it was probably February, March. And I seen him do a podcast about working out with someone in Nova Scotia. And I was like, all right, that's a province over for me. It's not even talking about entertainment. It's talking about working out with Bob Saget. No offense to Bob, but I don't essentially assume Bob Saget and workout. So I sent his agent an email, not mad, just like, buddy, like, come on. He's doing a podcast a province over for me. You might not know where Newfoundland is. It's right next door. And then like within maybe 10 minutes, he came back. He's like, stand by. I'm on it, working on it, going to try to get Bob. And I was like, there was a part of me that's like, did I just bully my way into an interview, or did like this guy just forget about me? And then was like, oh crap. Like, he did ask a while ago, so let's get him on. And then when Bob came on, he was like super friendly, super nice. I think he was like in another country altogether, getting ready to do a movie. And he took the time because it was during COVID. So they were kind of in lockdown too. But my takeaway from that interview, and I've mentioned it to many people, that I think maybe it's just me in my own head. The interview's done. Conversation's over. It's easy for an actor just to like click the thing and say, thank you. It was fun. I was like, all right, Bob, we're done. He's like, well, that's nice. He's like, so what are your plans for the day? What are you doing? I'm like, we're done. Like, you don't have to put on this act anymore, Bob. And he's like, no, I'm generally interested. Like, what do you do in Newfoundland? And I was like, well, I don't know what other Newfoundlanders do. I'm like, I'm going to play some PlayStation and play some NHL franchise mode. He's like, oh, that's nice. He's like, so do you have any plans for the weekend? I'm like, dude, like, we're done. Like, you don't. And then he just kept going. And I thought it was really nice of him. And at the end of it, he's just like, all right, now I have to go. I'm like, good, because I was ready to go 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, I think that's a radio thing. I think if you're into broadcasting and you come from broadcasting, once the interview's over, like, radio people will vacate the studio.
Yeah.
But the rest of the planet, they're happy to keep on talking.
I was okay with it, but I was just like, man, this is your time. Like, if you had to tell me like 10 minutes before, just say if it was a 50-minute episode and I want him for 50 minutes and he said at the 40-minute mark, no, I'm done. I'm like, I got 40 minutes with Bob Saget. That's okay. But it was like, he was okay sitting there for like another hour. I could have too. But then at one point he was like, all right, okay, cool. Like, I'm done. And I'm just like, great. Awesome. Like, we're both done at the same time. Cool.
Your podcast is rather successful. Yeah. But that doesn't mean you can quit your day job. What is your day job?
My day job right now is, so I work with CRA. I do e-service and
What's
housing,
CRA?
Canada Revenue Agency.
So it's like the IRS in the States.
Yeah, yeah. So like to some people I'm a good guy, to some people I'm a villain. Depends on like what you call in for. You know, if you need an account unlocked, I'm pretty sure I'm a good guy. If you need something benefits related, I'm probably a bad guy. Like, you know, because just because you didn't fill out a form or something happened along the way, I'm trying to help you out. But you know how it is. I call Rogers and Bell all the time, and I'm pretty sure they're trying to help me out with something, and you don't have the patience, or you didn't get the answer you wanted, so you let, I don't know, Sally from Toronto get rung up, and then you feel bad after. If you have a soul, you feel bad after.
Do you think there's a place for you in broadcasting, or have you just mastered this podcast so much that this is what I'm doing, and I'm a podcaster now, and this is where I'm going forward with all my skills?
Uh, I think I still like to find myself in broadcasting at some point, but like it's tough because I don't know a lot about it. And like I know I went to school for it, but in terms of just like sticking around a place or like I really wanted to go at Bell at one point at CTV Ottawa, and I did an internship there, and I liked it, but sometimes the newsroom environment wasn't the greatest for me. And with a disability, it's you got to go to a place that understands your disability, that wants to help with that disability. And even myself, I'm trying to like figure out like how do I write something up to let them know what my disability is and explain how I can be successful here. But I really do enjoy podcasting, and I really like that medium. So if I could find a way to balance both, it'd be nice. But I I think I've stopped sending out like resumes in the last maybe year and a half because I've had this job at CRA. I'm permanent. This year I got permanent, so I'm grateful for that. And it pays well. And in terms of radio, I don't know the pay. I don't know like how easy it is to just stay there. Like I think with government jobs, it's kind of like if they're gonna fire you, they gotta have a legit reason. There's a whole process for it. And I find with radio, it's like sometimes they just have layoffs and that's it. Like you can't really fight a layoff. You can't go in there and be like, guys, I've been here for 2 years. I've been doing great. They're like, yeah, but we got cuts and you're cut. And I'm like, great. Like I've seen it done with Bell. Like I love Dan O'Toole. I love Natasha Stashevsky. But like one day they're there, next day they're gone. That's it. And then you're kind of have to start over. And I don't know how I'd feel about having to start over. But yeah.
Well, what I would suggest you do is take a look at your paycheck you're getting from the government,
Yeah.
divide it in two, and then that will be your broadcast paycheck when you're
Oh
starting out.
God.
So,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, and then you can. It's
Well, I
that.
mean, listen, I mean, I know I laughed at it, but I mean, there's people like myself that if something came up tomorrow where they allowed me to do that, I really think I'd have a sit down and be like, okay, this is how much I got saved in my bank. This is how much I have to keep in my bank. But if you're passionate about it, if you're driven and this is where you want to go, I feel like I'd be doing an underservice to myself if I didn't give it a try. Now, does it mean I'm going to be successful at it? No, it's no guarantee, but I'd like to say, all right, I gave it a try, a fair shot, and if it worked out, great. Like I know pay is important, especially at this time, like especially the years that go by, things go up in price. But I feel like if you go to work and you like what you do, um, you're not really like it sounds silly, but pay doesn't really matter. Like it's something that you enjoy doing and you're getting paid for it regardless. Like tomorrow, if someone came to my podcast and said, all right, we're going to give you like $50 per interview or $50 a month, I'd be like, it's great. I enjoy doing it. And now you're going to give me $50 to continue to do this. Great. And someone's like, but it's only $50. I'm like, but I was making nothing. It's like, it's like I was just doing this for fun. Now someone's going to pay me to have fun at my job. Awesome. That's a bonus.
Well, what you could do is you could probably put an ad inside your show
Yeah.
at, you know, for that price, and
Yeah.
maybe somebody can get an ad. So that was probably the worst pitch I've ever heard for an ad in my whole life. But
Yeah.
if anybody
There
wants to
you
sponsor your
go.
show, it's available for sponsorship, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. I'm going downhill. I was doing so well.
Who do you want to interview on the show?
Uh, One fellow that I really like to interview because it's a guy that I admire, Conan O'Brien, just because I don't keep a lot of information, like, quotes, inspirational stuff that you want to kind of keep in your head that you kind of quote to your friends as mumbo jumbo or stuff you believe in. But I watched Conan's Tonight Show. I wasn't into his late night show because I was still young, but my brother got me into his Tonight Show, And as I grew up, I was like, bad move to LA. Would have kept him in New York. But I loved it. I love the Tonight Show. I love Conan's sense of how he does interviews, his self humor. And I think he'd be a good guest to have on. And I keep always going back to the quote now. I'm terrible for doing it myself, but I'll say it to other people where it's like the one where he talks about trying hard and like, if you try hard in life, good things will happen. And I used to have it memorized. Over time, I've kind of forgot it, but uh, I really like that because here he is at the pinnacle of like NBC kind of kicking him out the door. And he could have done anything in the world that he wanted to on air. Like, I mean, I know he makes jokes about like, here's this great painting that we have that NBC paid for. And then he tells people like they didn't actually pay for it. And he could have kicked him in the nads on the way out, but he didn't. He chose the high road. And I kind of respect him for that. Now, he did throw in a few digs that I like you can do anything you want in life as long as Jay Leno wants to do it too. I thought that was kind of humorous, but I don't know. That's one guy that I really admire and would love to have on. And I've been trying. It's not easy.
Hey, Bryan, congratulations on the success of your podcast, Tobin Tonight. You've done such a great job with it. I know it's a grind to go and get celebrities on the show to join you to do it and to sit in for the not your standard Q&A, but you've done a great job with it. This is probably the most successful intern project I've ever seen. That's taken off. So congratulations to you.
I have to sometimes remember that myself because it's easy to just say that. And then it's one thing that you're like, oh, I didn't get this person on a day, or man, my numbers don't look that great. But you got to remember that things take time. And that's something that we lose today where things want instant success. I'm probably one of those people, but when you hear someone give you a little bit of gratitude or say, hey, things are going well, I'm like, all right, that kind of keeps me going like, okay, we're doing okay. Just simmer down. There you go. Newfoundlanders know what simmer down means. I don't know if the rest of the country knows what it is.
Oh, I do. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thanks, man.